I knew that slavery, from my experience, is American history. It is about economics. It's money, 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 as you can see. People were people before they were slaves. People could be, as in African Americans, could be purchased, they could be sold, they could be mortgaged, they could be insured, they could be held as collateral, or they could even be gifted or rented. Some individuals got sold south. Didn't know if I'd be able to find those if that comes up within that realm, unless I tapped into other types of resources such as DNA. And some people, I had to realize not everybody was enslaved in this realm that I was getting ready to embark on, that there were going to be free people of color as well. I knew there was military participation by African Americans because I studied that quite intensely, especially the American Revolution and the Black Patriots deemed by SAR and DAR. And that also there were several myths about doing this type of research. And I wasn't going to let that happen, you know? So I want to make sure we all understand. They say you cannot, as in African Americans cannot find their ancestors prior to 1870. Let's not believe that. Okay? It happens daily. I mean, by seconds, people are finding folks. And you got to remember who's the holder of the records, who made the laws. People were paying taxes and they had to pay taxes on their property. So there is going to be records out there that people can find. And there could be certain collections, which I'll talk about in a little bit. I know the free people didn't have it any better than the people that were enslaved. There was still violence going on in the things that we read about or seen in movies or we know in our own families. There's descendants of slaveholders that are out there or slave owners. They're kind of quiet on some aspects. I interact with a lot of them right now, but I'm also not a threat or bringing anything. I'm looking for information that I can share towards this project. So there is myths out here about a good slave master. I ain't met one yet. 35 years, nothing in the papers. Little bit on one gentleman, but no, he still owns somebody. And then what is in the textbooks for Virginia used to be about the half enslaved person. I'm not believing that, so I think that's a myth as well. Former enslaved people took the slaveholder's name. That's not totally true. Family Search out in Salt Lake City and their holdings and say only about 15%. I see it more readily that the enslaved took the slaveholder's name during colonial times. But after that, these names changed. The spellings changed. And then when they became free, they could take whatever name they wanted to. Some of them kept the name of their last slave owner, or maybe it was a previous slave owner. And again, more research has to be done to confirm and support those type things. But just know it's not an automatic. I'm a Murphy. That does not mean that Murphys held my people enslaved. And so we'd have to check that out, further. And also that if you're doing the African American research, you have to research the European and the white people that are around them. They're together. There's no separating. You're coming into a new county, you have to be able to know who's in the neighborhood or who's in that community. And the historical society, they know what's here. They know who's here. Everybody is in here together. There could be pockets of where things are at, but they know who's here pretty much throughout the history. And also that if you're African American and that you descend from people that were enslaved, you're evidence that they survived it. And hats off to all of us for that. This is a list of some common genealogy challenges. And some of this people are going to be familiar with, and others might not think about it. but yes, there could be records that could have been destroyed or never recorded. That could happen very easily. Sometimes people know the information, they're just not going to share it. It's going to go to their grave. That happens in my family. There's some stories that are not getting repeated, and they were told as children not to repeat that. And I know my mom right now has other stories in the last 30 some years that she's still not telling me, but they could be some family secrets or something that went on. Sometimes people limit themselves to cause a challenge because they're only doing online research. And also, again, I talked about the names. And again, not everybody was enslaved, but Virginia was number one as far as people being enslaved at a certain period. We don't know what we have a lot of times in a document because we didn't analyze the document. Sometimes we get a death certificate and we figure we're done. That person's died, history's over. In my world of research, I'm just getting started if I got a document to build from. And it might take me back or it might take me forward. So the scarcity of records is always a problem. And also, some oral histories, you got to have some supporting evidence. I heard the Davis story in my life for 50 some years about the Davis was a slaveholder. He had babies, you know, with his slave. And the family was of William Davis, and the wife was Mildred Ann. Her last name was Brand, and her maiden name per se. And all of this about 4 kids, get out of Virginia, go to Pennsylvania. And a year ago, I found out it was the Mildred Brand story and not the Davis story. Everything mirrored exactly. So it got a little twisted. And so we always want to find supporting evidence to support oral histories. And those are such key points in doing research because they're leads to everything. It can pinpoint where people are at or something that's going on. We know spelling doesn't count. We got to realize that if we don't plan out the research, it's not going to fall in our hands. There's no magic in this. We definitely have to do the digging and turn the pages. Okay. And also not allowing DNA to come in. Some people don't want to deal with DNA. It helps a lot of people. And another thing is they're not focusing on the local level. And I tend to say this quite often. And I say everything that Ancestry and Family Searches got online, you think about it. Where did they get it from? They came into a community and copied or scanned in those documents. Those documents would have originated at the local level. So we got a convenience of using Ancestry, Family Search, other databases, but realize when I'm teaching people how to do this, they got to start local and soak up whatever is at the local level, be it the courthouse, the historical societies, public libraries, the genealogy groups, or whatever, because you know what? You're missing half of what's there if you're just relying on what's online that these companies are providing. So another thing is letting our 21st century thinking get in the way of our research. If I take what I know and what I've experienced just in my lifetime and try to go back to say 1850 and try to answer with what I know, it's not going to work. It's going to definitely give me a brick wall. When I started at UVA in July 2019, they gave me a list. This is just a piece of the list here. And I call it the list. That's what I started working from. There was over 2,000 entries on this spreadsheet. And what they were doing, it was saying it was going from 1817 to 1870. I've got some people that were designated as being enslaved, and I had some of the slaveholders or who had control of that person and was able to rent them to the university during the construction time. We also could see that there was occupations associated with them. And so what happened, the brilliance of Kurt Van Dyck and others, that when this project first started, they had folks, and I believe they were interns, that went through the financial records of the university. And this is where they built the list from, wherever money was spent on labor. And so I have the resource, as you can see, in the amount of money that they had. So for me, little genealogist, wait a minute, where's the location? You're giving me a name, but I don't have a location. Wait, you give me the name of an enslaved person. There's no age, pinpoint. There's no birth. Where's this plantation? So I'm starting off having to rebuild even to get to where people are supposedly at during the time they would have rented someone to UVA. So that's a sample of one of the sources that I use. So what's my research plan? Listen and ask questions, learn about the communities, gotta stay local. I push that everywhere I can go because that's where I get most of the information, is at the local level. I got to learn about the slaveholders. Some of these slaveholders that were renting people to UVA were Thomas Jefferson's friends and family, and that extends all over. There were also professors at the university. The students were not allowed to bring their enslaved, but the professors could. So, a strategy I use, I'm going back and forth. Sometimes I'm going to start in the present and try to go back, or I'm going to go from back and come forward. This is just back and forth, reverse genealogy. And again, I don't have a location. So I first have to start off finding out where was, and I'm going to say slaveholder, as in the one that rented the people to the university, where were they at? And sometimes I see names like John Smith or maybe Howard Johnson, very common. So then I got to figure out which one is alive during this time and in this spot and in one of the counties that could be associated with renting the labor. So again, I start off with my questions about what I know. I know about Monticello, Highlands, Montpelier. I know there should have been a supply of labor coming from these local areas. So what do I need to know? Where's the plantation? When did these people die? Because that means they would have left a will. That means they would have had an estate settlement. And I could find names possibly, or some public record, right? And also, what information am I missing if I find somebody? What else do I need to know? And I'm going to walk you through some of the things that I've done. And also, I needed to make sure I start drafting a list of the resources to make myself a checklist to make sure everybody I'm looking at the same things. And it might be that I find information about, say, the Murphy family in one record set, but it doesn't show up for the Smith family in another, but I still need to check. So slave era research and questions, got to know the law. You got to know the law that was in place. And my friend Judy Russell, if she doesn't preach that like a sermon on Sunday, is understanding the law. And she is the legal genealogist, and she has a blog out as well. And she speaks around, and she now lives in our area in Greene County. But I also needed to find any emancipation or manumission papers. One of the things I didn't mention earlier on that list, and I did say that there's over 2,000 entries, but I didn't tell you about 90 to 95% of the names on the list are first name only. So that's a whole nother challenge right there. And that's for the enslaved folks. So coming back to here, I needed to find out if there were any narratives out here or any family genealogy records. I knew these historical homes had stuff, but what about the neighbors and the ones that were not the Jefferson or the Madisons or, anyone like that? Where is the information? City and county directors, depends. When did they start taking them? Where were the public notices? All of these things that I'm sharing are places that people need to look. And this is my mind processing What is your plan? Where are you going? Where are you going to find this stuff? You know, and I needed to know where slave era research had been successful, but also not successful, because you learn just as much from when people don't succeed as you do when they do succeed. And you look at it and try to work it out. So I needed to make sure I was keeping in touch with the groups I was involved in. And of course, anything I come across, I'm sharing it, because that could open up for somebody else to find something as well. Anyone that's known me for the last, since I've been here in Virginia, this is my Murphy's Rule. These are the basics. This is even how I teach folks how to do genealogy. And it doesn't matter what race you're looking at. This is about the research. You want to follow the money, the land, the water, the community, and the faith of the people. Every one of those are target places to find research when you're looking for anybody, okay, in the genealogy world. I also needed to get a map. Those of you that do research know we have to have a map. And you know, Albemarle County has surrounded by 8 counties. It's the only one in the Commonwealth that is surrounded by 8 counties. That's my research area right there. I had to narrow it down. So that means there's connections from every county to another county. Nobody's standing alone. If I go find a Brown family in Orange, I guarantee you there's going to be Browns in Albemarle, Louisa, Fluvanna, and I live it. If I can talk my daughter into making me a map where I can show these connections, she's a GIS mapper, that I would plot this out, how all these counties and these families are connecting from county to county, and definitely during slave era time. So that's my research area right there. So another thing I had to start, again, making that list. What are the records? What are the resources? And I was looking for enslaved, then free, because just because they're free on one document doesn't mean they were always free. So I had to figure that out. I had to find the narratives. I had to look for the cohabitation records, if there were any, and military files, any court cases, anything that comes up that I could tie people together to. The Freedmen's Bureau, books and more books. We got a university here, a major one. That means people were doing research. I needed to find out what they were doing research on. This is typical day for me, or evening. That's some of the resources I'm tapping into, including the cookies, the coffee, or the glass of wine. I'm having fun no matter what. I'm trying to be focused, and those are just some of the resources that are just sitting around me. And some of the books I know, the light blue books, the Slave Birth Index, you have here at the Historical Society. But that's just very on a small scale, but just to give a glimpse of some of the things that are there. I also use a lot of Jean Cooper's books. Some of you might know about her, but she did the index to records on the antebellum Southern plantations. But I also needed to talk to people about the house repositories. And if you're not familiar with that, we'll answer that during the Q&A. I needed to find where are the tax lists. Is everything held at the local courthouse from 1817, or did it get shipped off somewhere else, or is it at the Historical Society? I needed to make sure I knew in each county where the Historical Society was at, the courthouses, and also the libraries, but also the churches and the cemeteries. I needed to be able to maneuver around. So I come today saying, I'm throwing this out here. I'm looking for these folks or people that could have had some connection to UVA. So I also need to know the plantation owners, not only just looking at 1850 and 1860 slave schedule. That wasn't enough, because I'm talking about people back in 1817. And think about it. If I have a labor, enslaved labor, and he's being rented in 1820, 9 times out of 10, he was born prior to 1800. That's a whole nother look at records, a different set of records, if there are any back then. I need to stay close to my genealogy buddies with Central Virginia history researchers, Burke Brown Step, other groups that are out there that are doing some of the same type stuff. And again, I'm looking for descendants of plantation owners as well. Sometimes Google is my friend, and I just put it out there looking for so and so, somebody in this location. So I'm starting this. How am I going to get the word out that we're doing this? They're building this beautiful memorial, but how will people know we're looking for them if they're potential descendants? Well, I went to social media. That would be the best place for me to find people. I set up a Facebook page, Finding Enslaved Laborers at UVA, and I also hit Twitter, and I said, here we go. People, you got connections to Central Virginia counties? Let me hear from you. Let me find out. If you have people you believe were enslaved in one of these counties, let's check it out and figure it out, because I could build from that list and go from there. There's some of the posts and things, and you can see some of the descendants there at the memorial, and that was a couple years ago. I took pictures there, and again, there's communication happening. I need the word to get out. So part of my plan was to look at other spreadsheets and books and other resources, have people who think they're a potential descendant fill out an intake form. Remember, I mentioned I came from the housing world. We had people fill out an intake form. So in other words, give me your name of your parents, your grandparents, your great grandparents, and where are you stuck at? And where were these people at? Alive, or if they had passed on. And then I could pick up from whatever area they stay and try to see if it connects to anybody that's on that list and other resources. And believe me, that list of over 2,000 hasn't even put a dent. They believe there's up to 4,000 laborers that were involved with the construction and building the University of Virginia. And my list only has, over 2,000, right? And it goes in after freedom. So also, I needed to build trees on Ancestry, make sure they're accessible, that people could find them, and share the research as it comes available. So communication was huge for me to make sure I'm talking it up and telling people about it. I had to learn how to use Google Docs. That wasn't something in the housing field that I had experience with. Now I know how to use it, definitely, because people are sharing documents and things all the times. Right now, to date, I believe there's 100 and some trees I have built, and that would include the slaveholders as well as the descendants, and you'll see an example of that. And I'm probably working with well over 100 and some people as well at various stages. Some people already know who their enslaved ancestors are, and other people don't, and that takes the time of the research. So what does UVA have that can give me? So I'm sharing resources you might not be familiar that's out there online that's accessible, and it's free. And this is called the Jewel site, and it's Jefferson's University, the early life. I also had special collections, and I knew as a university there's ongoing research, and I knew they had primary sources. Okay, so that's a picture of the Jewel site, Juel. And what you can see is they have a list of African Americans. They also have a list of slave owners and the professors and things throughout this time. So you can see the hyperlinks, anything blue that's on there. Some of you might know who that's a picture of, which is Brigadier General John Harthwell Cox, Cocké, Bremo Bluff Plantation in Fluvanna. And that's a picture of him. He actually rented folks to UVA for his friend Thomas Jefferson. Anyway, so you can see some of the names listed. And again, there's blue hyperlinks right next to it. This is an outstanding resource. Now, here you're looking at people that are referred to by either no name. There's another list that says first name only. Here you see the words hands, Negro, boys, janitor, but you're not seeing a first name, what we typically would think of. But again, it could link to somebody and we could piece that together. And that actually is a picture of Sally Cottrell, who actually was at university as well. So here's another point. I pull up Richard Price, right? And that is one of the slaveholders that rented people to UVA. So you can see the profile that they have on this website. So it's something definitely to just go through and check out. So these are the trees. You're just getting a glimpse of them. So if you notice under on the left-hand side, it's basically 13 pages. Each one of those pages have 25 trees on them. So maybe 15 or 20 are my own personal, and the rest of them have to do with either the enslaved or slaveholders on this research. And on the right are just a sample of some of the trees that have been shared with, the MEL stands for Memorial to Enslaved Laborers. Okay, so that would be the descendants tree or the enslaved laborers building to a descendant. And also, I have trees that people have shared with me, and there's 4 pages of them. We have a nonprofit in the area of Central Virginia called the Descendants of the Enslaved Communities at UVA. You can see their mission to research and reclaim the narrative, to honor the legacies of the enslaved and free Black communities and their descendants, and to achieve restorative justice for the communities that were rooted at the University of Virginia and the surrounding regions. This is my sidebar partners right here because they are descendants of those enslaved laborers as well as descendants of enslaved throughout the Central Virginia area. And I wanted to share this because this is another resource that if you have folks that want to keep up with what's going on at UVA, there was a HB Bill 1980 about scholarships in the state schools, you're going to get information from this group right here. Sign in, become a member. They got categories and things like that. And there's a way to just keep yourself up to date. So I'd encourage the Historical Society, because if something comes up related to your county or your areas or your families that are here, this might be a place to share information, but also to receive information. On one of their pages, under research, they list some of the folks that I'm looking for, and they broke it out by counties. So you can see we do have Orange County up there, and we know the Barber family was here, and also the French family. And also you can see there's Unknown. This is just a little bit of names that we're dealing with, but just to give you an idea. But these are also some of the ones that I've already connected with descendants, which we've got somewhere 60 to 70 descendants that we've come across in the last couple of years. So let me give you some examples of how this goes. I'm looking for Alfred and Henry. You see my spreadsheet. There's all the entries where James Barber rented an Alfred and Henry to UVA. They were also sick at one time. But you can see it basically ran, from I think it's 1829 forward. So what you see is, I don't know if I wasn't from Virginia now, I wouldn't known about James Barber without doing research. Who is James Barber? You want to know why? Because there's barbers in Albemarle. There's barbers in Orange. There's barbers in Louisa. And it's like, okay, who's connecting? And of course, who's under the owner part is going to be James Barber, white James Barber, not a black James Barber. So I also had to make sure I'm distinguishing on who I'm looking for. And goodness, the naming patterns are unbelievable in a lot of families. I don't know how many Johns, James, or Bobs you guys might have in your own family, but it's no different back here in these early 1800s or late 1700s. So looking at the list, it's telling me names, what they were doing, and of course I've got a date. And again, the surname. First question I think about, did the enslaved labor, Alfred or Henry, take on the Barber surname? Remember earlier I said typically they don't, but during the colonial period they did. I have yet to find Alfred and Henry. There's a lot of Alberts and a lot of Henrys, but not associated around James Barber or anywhere around Orange County. And I'm going to say yet. So the other thing was, do they connect the family of Barbers here, as in African American families? Do they connect to the ones that are in Albemarle County? Because all it takes is one person to step into that other county and start a line. One couple. Maybe one Alfred or Henry married somebody from Albemarle, and that's how they got in there. But those are some of the questions you can see at the bottom that I'm going to go through a process. Did they take the name? I'm going to check that first. Did they make it to 1870? That's another question. Did they make it to after the Civil War? Another question. And again, looking at the 1829, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be born either before or around 1800. And again, another different way of looking at doing the research. So I built a tree just like I described. There's Mr. James Barber right there, right? And of course, I'm building this so it's public, so people can access it. I have notes and comments that are up there that says this is who I'm looking for. This was what he did, right? And I've identified him as the slaveholder. And then in the notes, you'll see that he rented in 1829 Alfred and Henry. And again, my job is to find Alfred and Henry and if they have any descendants. Library of Virginia is a wealth of information. We mentioned this earlier about cohabitation type records and things like that. This is another fabulous site to tap into for research if you're conducting any type of African American research. And they have the Virginia Untold. And as you can see on the right-hand side is a Chancery Record Index. You can pop in the county and put a surname in there and see if there were any court cases. Why would I even take you to there? Well, number one, we're talking about people and their property when you're talking about a slaveholder and enslaved people. And yes, there's always disputes about property. And this is where you're following that money also, is looking at these chancery court cases. I have one is 158 pages, and I got another one that's 196. And there's all kind of stuff up in there. Biggest thing is names. I also want to introduce you to WikiTree. And why am I telling you about WikiTree? People know about WikiTree, this site at all? Fabulous. This is a global collaborative of genealogists around the world. And what it is for me, you see where that arrow is pointing? And I believe that's 35,911,799 profiles. And I'm going to say 99%, they're all European or European descendants, or I'll just say white. I have to go where they're at in order to find who I'm looking for. Remember, property, economics. They got profiles here. These are volunteers all over the world that help to build this database here. They have a database of Virginia slave owners, and there's 145. There's volunteers that are putting them up. And I'm going to say for Virginia, it's every state, but right now there's a team of Virginia researchers, and they do the research and put it up for public access. So, where did I go? Where are the people at? Myself and William and Mary, they have a similar project called the Lemon Project. Dr. Joanne Johnson is doing the same type research that I'm doing for William and Mary that I do for UVA. We took our information and put it on WikiTree. If we're not here tomorrow, it's still sitting there. Besides the universities, it's still sitting there and people can access it. Remember I showed you a little taste of the list? That list are the lines that are on the bottom there on the screen there. That is the spreadsheet that's saying this is who we're looking for. And then what you see is you'll see profiles of the slaveholder, in which you're seeing the profile there. And that happens to be Joseph Brand. He rented 3 people. One of the biggest things about WikiTree, it needs to be sourced. If not, it's flagged that it's an unsourced profile. That means don't look at it unless you're going to deliver something. That's how I look at it. They couldn't source something, then I know nothing on there is valid because I want the sources so I can go look at it myself. Not taking the word that it's all good, but I can go find out from there. So again, this gentleman, Joseph Brand Jr., rented 3 people to UVA. And so another thing, it moved. Looking at Joseph Brand down at the bottom left, you'll see that it will also connect each of the people that were enslaved. They have a profile for whatever information we can find on them. So if I took one of Joseph Brand, he rented Fleming to UVA and as a laborer. And so don't know if he had any children or if he ever married, because February 27th, 1866 is when General Assembly basically said all Negroes could legally marry. And so we're not going to get basically a marriage information type record until after that time. And you can find those in a collection of the Freedmen's Bureau and things. So anyway, if they live past the Civil War, I'm going to Record Group 105, which is the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. This is my ultimate favorite collection. It's my favorite so much that every Friday night at 7 o'clock, we had Freedmen Bureau Fridays. And people from all over the country are hanging out. And we are going through some of these records. Then about 11 o'clock or 12, it turns into DNA and I'm gone, and stuff, because it turns the topic around and people are helping each other and they're sharing information. And so far, we've been doing it now for a couple of years. There's always some connection that's found on Friday nights. And it's fun, but one of the things is we're all learning, and I just posted something on Facebook the other night, and I found a census for Franklin County, Pennsylvania. Some of you might have heard of Chambersburg. That's the county I'm talking about. And it was a 1842 census, and all it had was the name and it had the person's occupation. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. And I'm looking for my people, my own people, right? And it had a Ellen Berry, a woman, and her occupation said Negro. And I thought, what? What is that? So I threw it out there on Facebook. Y'all, anybody ever seen this before? Am I looking and seeing this correctly? What is and she was the only woman on the list. Of course, Pennsylvania is a free state. That Joseph Brand, on his deathbed, he freed his slaves, and he said, get them out and take them to Franklin County, Pennsylvania. That was some of the stuff that was in a Chancery court case. Fleming, who I said he rented, the receipt for his coffin for $4 was in the Chancery court case. So I knew that was going to stop for him on the research at 1836. So coming back here to Record Group 105, we know who the freedmen are. Do y'all know who the refugees are on the Bureau? The Bureau opened up right after the Civil War, basically. March 3rd, it's showing 1865. There are some pre-Bureau records for the state of Louisiana, the state of Mississippi, and then Fort Monroe, Virginia. So, do you know who the refugees are? Anybody? You're not going to guess? Nope. White people. This is a federal collection. Everybody's in there. Feds weren't discriminating at that time, you know. So you realize that the refugees are whites, the freedmen are formerly enslaved, and the people that abandoned their lands and basically coming back, or the Bureau took over during the war, whatever it was, you know, they're coming back. But understand who's in the record, who created the record. The Freedmen's Bureau is managed by the military. So right there it tells you about the paperwork. And I'm telling you, do I have it on there? Yes, 3.5 million records. And people say you can't find your people prior to 1870. Here's an example where you got to go look. Okay. So the types of services that the Bureau offered, and I use this in the research for UVA because if they made it to the Civil War or after, think of the chaos that was going on. Plantation owners are freaking out. They lost their labor. You got enslaved people that now never, some of them probably never stepped off of the plantation, and they're free. Where do they go? The federal government under Lincoln set up these field offices throughout the South. And in the field offices is where they provided services such as education, healthcare, food. They call them rations at that time, clothing. There were refugee camps, legalizing of marriages, labor contracts, transportation records, letters being sent, letters being received with names. That's the big key. Names, names, names. And like I said, who's in there? It's not just poor whites, it's whites, period. When people had to take an oath, they're in the Bureau. There's some in other collections, but a lot of them are in the Bureau to take an oath to the United States now after the war. And again, got to know what's in there. It's federal, it's going to include everybody. This is some of the gems on the left of the records that we're seeing on our Friday nights or just doing research, right? Look at that laundry list of information. And then what's on the right is the type of stuff it can give you as a researcher. And I'm speaking to anyone that's doing the research because everybody could be in here. And I think about and again, that myth that we can't find anybody. Well, you're not going to find them in the 1860 census unless they're free. If they were enslaved, you hope they went to one of these field offices and got services. Or say I walk up to the field office, my name is Shelley Murphy. My husband and boys were sold to Mississippi. That bureau's going to get me to Mississippi. They're going to send a letter. So that's the collection of the letters. Letters received and letters sent. Ancestry last year put out a 26-minute video, and it's called The Lost Letters of Hawkins Wilson. It's 26 minutes. It's on YouTube. And it was an 8 or a 9-year-old boy who got sold. And then after the war is over, he's coming and looking for his sisters. He goes to the bureau and they're writing a letter to the field office where he remembered his sister's names and the owner's name. And it's really impactful, 26 minutes. And a couple friends of mine is part of that, you know, Nika Sewell Smith with Who is Nika Sewell? She's the genealogist on there and walking these descendants on tracking about their ancestor. So anyway, you're looking at what it can give you. And again, let's not forget just the names, dates, who's in the neighborhood, who's around them. Former slave owners are also listed. One of the big sites that I use is called Mapping the Freedmen's Bureau. It's free. A couple of my friends developed this site. This is what we hang out with. If you see down there in the left-hand corner, those are the icons of where the field offices were at. You go tap on it, and I think I got a slide on there. And you can tap up, find out where all the field offices are at. I'm just looking at Virginia because Virginia field office records are indexed. Only Virginia's field offices. There's other parts that other states might have, but when Governor Kane was governor, they authorized, put up some money, and we got it done. Lots of people were involved in indexing these records. So a box pops up, and I tapped on Orange Field Office, the Freedman, Orange County. There's actually were 2 field offices in this area. And it tells me that the microfilm is M1913. That's for the state of Virginia. And it's telling me roll 149. Well, what also the feds did was a descriptive pamphlet, which says, okay, Virginia, you got the most rolls in all these other states. Every state has a descriptive pamphlet. So 203 rolls is what Virginia has. And so in that descriptive pamphlet, it'll say roll 1, what's on it? Roll 2, what's on it? All the way through the 203. So you know what you're kind of looking for and where it's at. Okay. And you can see this is Orange Courthouse, and that's that row 149. But again, there's 2 locations here. And here you see Gordonsville. And look at, they got row 90 rolls, 90 through 97. And those are at a different level there because a lot of reports actually from other field offices actually went into Gordonsville. And don't ever be surprised if you get in this collection and you're looking in something in Virginia and you find a Mississippi collection in there or a file on Mississippi or one of the Carolinas or whatever. That's why I tell folks, you see 150 images or 1,000, you want to look at each one of them because of the misspellings, the first name only, and this, that, and other. One of the other things that's been significant with my UVA research is when I find labor contracts, 9 times out of 10, I'm finding the formerly enslaved and they're entering into a labor contract with their former slave owner. And that is where you want to try to make those connections. So now you're looking at the different records that were for the Gordonsville field office. So again, here's an example of row 96, the image. It's a labor contract, and it's F.E. Garnett of Orange, and the servant, colored servant, as is designated in the labor contract, it's Lawrence Epps. The date of this labor contract is September 1st, 1865. What I tell people when you're looking at labor contracts, you're going to have 2 parties. Someone's going to be hiring and someone's being hired. There's going to be a date. There's going to be a location. It's going to tell you where they're going to work and what type of work and how long you're going to work. And then the Bureau is helping to negotiate these type things. So again, that is a plethora of information when you're looking for people and regardless of who it is. And so the gold mine is because it's given me names, and I'm always going to ask the question, does this person, Garnett, connect to Mr. Epps? Is there a relationship there? Is there a connection? So Watson, Egbert Watson, he rented no, this one is Richard Price, and he rented Jim Henderson to UVA. What are the questions? I'm going to say, where's the Price and where's the Watsons at? The enslaved laborer Nelson on the next page that's coming up, or you see him on the second row there, Egbert, he's got a surname. His name is Nelson Price. And the first thing I'm going to say is, oh, wait a minute, he's got a surname. What's going on? How old is he? Don't know. You know, what is the connection of the Watson and the Price? And is there a connection between Nelson Price and Richard Price? Is Egbert Watson connected to Richard Price? Well, you know what? Got to go build that tree. And look at that. If you can see that, you see Egbert Reed Watson. He was an attorney at UVA. Look at his mama. Y'all know the trees. His mother's name is Jane Howard Price. That's her maiden name. Connection. Ding, 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 right there. But also, look who Jane's daddy is. Richard Price, who also rented laborers to UVA. So now I've got a connection. Now, there were several times that people researched, different times with the same names. So I might have 5 or 6 Nelsons, 3 of them might have Nelson Price. Got to figure out if that's the same Nelson, if I'm talking about one Nelson Price and the other Nelsons, are they also? So researching those slaveholders is critical. Did one on Aaron because there were 6 different entries on a Aaron, no last name, and different people rented him. After I did the research of all of the slaveholders that was renting him, they're all connected. So there was one Aaron, it ended up. And again, that took a couple months. And with the support of folks like on that Friday night to work through this, are we seeing more than one? Because we're dealing with first name only. So you can see the connections here, which was like a gold mine. My other question, and maybe Mr. Walker helped me later about this, because our Jalon Price from here, his wife was Joyce Barber, but Barber, and we know that. I want to know, does she connect to James Barber, governor, so forth? So that's another question. Don't know, but I'd want to research that just for curiosity. So when I look at that, I see Egbert, I see his mother, I see his grandfather, and then I see his great grandfather. And they all had something to do with slavery and connections to UVA. So winding this down, going forward, my job right now is for me to build these relationships throughout the historical societies, the churches, and the genealogy groups in the area. Let them know what I'm doing, who I'm looking for. And so I'm going from historical society to historical society, and I did this a few years ago. Continue to seek out for slave owner descendants and enslaved descendants. I am in contact with a lot of descendants of the slaveholders. Some of this stuff they weren't aware of, but they knew they had information. That was another thing, and they were willing to share it. And I appreciate that to help with the work we're doing. Continue to work with the Descendants of Enslaved Community, that nonprofit I mentioned about earlier, to help locate more. They actually hold monthly meetings, and I put on here the second Thursday of each month that people can join in. If they've got connections to those 8 counties, come in. There's always information shared or some tips shared that could help people with their research. And they have a Descendants Day scheduled at UVA April 20th. So one of the ways is to get on their mailing list to keep up with that, because that'll be a nice event. They've done 2 of them so far, and they've been just fabulous. And it's typically right at the memorial. So I'm going to say thank you and turn it back over to Ray if there's any questions. And I'll go from there. And there's contact information if anybody needs it. You're welcome to take a picture of that screen. Okay.